The divine call. The journey of Abraham from Ur to destiny. Setting the stage, the world of Ur and Abram's early life. In the ancient days, long before the great empires rose and fell, before kingdoms stretched across continents, there lay a city, Ur of the Chaldeans. This was a bustling, vibrant metropolis nestled along the fertile banks of the Euphrates River, in a land known as Mesopotamia. It was a center of commerce and culture, adorned with towering ziggurats that reached skyward as if to touch the heavens. The streets alive with traders, priests, artisans, and farmers. Ur was the jewel of its age, surrounded by the wonders of civilization, but also the shadows of idolatry and ancient beliefs that stretched far and wide. Amidst this backdrop was a man named Abram. Born into a family of substance and standing, Abram's lineage was known for its ties to the city's traditions and gods. His father, Terah, was a respected man, a priest or craftsman, some say, whose life was deeply intertwined with the customs of their people. Abram's early years were shaped by the rhythms of Ur, the sound of merchants haggling, the fragrance of incense rising from altars, the gleam of gold and lapis lazuli in the bustling market squares. Yet, even as a youth, Abram's heart bore a restlessness that could not be quelled by the allure of Ur's grandeur. Stories were whispered about the heavens, about one true God beyond the idols carved from wood and stone, and these tales kindled a fire deep within him. Abram's spirit seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of his city, yearning for something greater, a promise whispered on the wind. It was in this moment, when the familiar world felt both comforting and constraining, that a divine voice echoed, reaching Abram's soul in ways no mortal voice could. The call of God would soon change everything. The divine voice, God's command to Abram. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Abram found himself alone on the rooftop of his father's house. The bustle of Ur had settled into a gentle murmur, and the stars began to pierce the velvet darkness of the night. In that quiet, Abram's thoughts drifted beyond the city walls, beyond the known and the seen, toward the unseen mysteries of the heavens. It was then that the voice came, not thunderous like the storms that occasionally swept the plains, nor soft like the whispers of the night breeze, but clear, commanding, and filled with authority that resonated deep within his very being. Abram, the voice said. He started heart-pounding. The voice was unlike any he had ever heard. It was the voice of the one true God, the creator of all things, calling Abram by name. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Abram felt a mixture of awe and confusion. To leave the familiar, his home, his family, the gods of his people, was no small task. Yet, the voice carried a promise beyond all promises, a covenant that would change his life and the course of history. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. The words echoed in Abram's heart, filling him with a strange hope and certainty. This was no ordinary call. It was a summons to faith, to obedience, and to trust in a God who had not revealed himself fully to the world yet. The promise was staggering, but so was the demand. To leave behind all he knew, to embark on a journey into the unknown, guided only by faith. Abram's mind raced. What would his father say? What about his family, his friends? Could he really abandon the life he had always known? But the voice was unyielding, and Abram understood that this was the moment that would define his destiny. In that silent night, beneath the vast expanse of stars, Abram knelt and whispered, "Here I am, Lord, I will go." And so, with a heart filled with faith and courage, Abram began the journey from Ur, leaving behind the familiar to step into the promise of God's unfolding plan. Leaving Ur, the first steps of faith. The dawn broke over Ur, spilling pale light over the rooftops and the gleaming Euphrates River. Abram rose early that morning, his mind alive with the weight of the night's divine encounter. The city, still waking, seemed unchanged. Yet everything was different now for Abram. The call of God had marked him, and the path ahead was set. Abram sought out his father Terah to share the vision he had received. The old man, seasoned in tradition and bound by the ways of their ancestors, listened carefully. Terah's eyes betrayed a mixture of disbelief, concern, and perhaps even silent hope. To leave Ur was no small matter. His family, his wealth, his standing were tied deeply to the city. Still, Abram's resolve was firm. The God who spoke had shown him a glimpse of something greater, something beyond idols and earthly kingdoms. Terah, though hesitant, would accompany Abram on the early stages of this journey, leaving behind the life they knew for a land yet unnamed. The household buzzed with activity. Abram gathered his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, servants, livestock, and provisions. The caravan was modest, yet heavy with the hopes of a new beginning. As they moved away from Ur's walls, Abram cast a final glance at the towering ziggurat, the temples dedicated to moon gods and sun gods, and the idols that had filled his youth. A deep breath, a prayer whispered in faith, and they set their faces toward the unknown. The road was long and uncertain. Across dry plains and rolling hills, under the scorching sun and the vast night sky, Abram and his company traveled. They passed through lands ruled by kings and tribes, some welcoming, others wary. At times, the journey was hard. The weight of leaving all that was familiar bore down on Abram's shoulders. But each step was taken with trust in the promise whispered by God's voice. Their destination was not yet clear, only that God would reveal it in time. Abram's heart clung to the promise of blessings, to the hope of becoming a great nation, and that through him all peoples of the earth would be blessed. As the days passed, Abram's faith grew stronger. The land before him was new and wild, but his spirit was steady. Every night, beneath the stars, he sought God's guidance. Every morning, he set forth again, trusting the path God was carving. The journey to Haran, trials and trust. As Abram and his family journeyed northwest from Ur, the landscape shifted beneath their feet. Fertile plains gave way to rugged hills, and the warm desert winds whispered stories of ancient peoples and forgotten gods. Their caravan moved steadily, the pace measured by the needs of their flocks and the strength of their resolve. Days turned into weeks. Along the way, they encountered tribes both friendly and hostile. Each interaction tested Abram's leadership and faith. There were moments when food was scarce and water wells ran dry. Sarai, ever steadfast by Abram's side, comforted the weary and encouraged the young and old alike. Lot, the nephew, learned from his uncle's calm demeanor, though sometimes the tension of the journey stirred within him a longing for ease and prosperity. The nights were filled with quiet prayers beneath the vast expanse of stars. Abram would often rise before dawn, his eyes lifted toward the heavens, seeking confirmation that he was still on the right path. The promise of a great nation and blessing echoed within, but the journey was long and the destination unknown. Eventually, the caravan reached the city of Haran, a place of safety and rest nestled among the hills of the north. It was here that Terah, Abram's father, decided to settle. Though it was not the land God had promised, it was a place where the family could find shelter and regroup. In Haran, Abram paused. The pull of the call remained strong, yet the comfort of a town with its familiar trade and neighbors was a temptation to linger. But the voice that had summoned him was not silent. In his heart, Abram felt the urgency of the mission, the unfolding covenant that God was establishing. The land of Canaan, the land God would give to Abram's descendants, lay beyond Haran's horizon, shrouded in mystery and promise. Abram knew the time would come to press onward, to leave behind even this temporary refuge and step fully into the destiny God had set before him. The call renewed, Abram's move to Canaan. Time passed in Haran, the seasons turning as Abram's family made their temporary home. Yet within Abram's heart, the divine call never waned. The promise whispered so long ago at Ur still beckoned, stronger and clearer than ever. One day, as the sun rose over the hills surrounding Haran, Abram heard the voice of God once more, not through thunder or fire, but in a still, small assurance within his spirit. "Leave this place," the Lord said. "Go to the land I will show you." Without hesitation, Abram gathered his household again. Sarai, steadfast and faithful, stood beside him. Lot, his nephew, ready to follow his uncle's lead, prepared the flocks and servants. With renewed determination, Abram turned their faces toward Canaan, the land promised to him and his descendants. As they traveled southward, the terrain changed. The lush hills and fertile valleys of Canaan stretched out before them, dotted with ancient oak trees and winding rivers. This was a land both beautiful and wild, filled with the promise of new beginnings, but also inhabited by many peoples and tribes. Upon entering Canaan, Abram paused to take in the sight. The land was vast and untamed, yet the weight of God's promise filled him with hope. Here, he would build altars and worship the one true God, away from the idols of his youth. True to God's word, Abram's faith was met with blessing. His flocks and herds multiplied, and his wealth grew. The land, though not yet fully possessed, was fertile ground for the future nation God promised. Yet Abram knew that this journey was just the beginning. Trials awaited, choices that would test his trust and obedience. But with every step, Abram's faith deepened. Rooted in the promise of a God who called him out of the familiar and into destiny. Abram's altar and the covenant's first signs. Upon entering the land of Canaan, Abram felt a profound sense of awe. This was not merely a physical place. It was the ground upon which God's promises would be built. With reverence and humility, Abram selected a high place near Shechem, a city nestled between ancient oak trees and rolling hills. There, he built his first altar to the Lord, a sacred marker of faith and thanksgiving. The altar was more than stones piled on the earth. It was Abram's tangible response to the voice that had called him so many miles from Ur. It symbolized his commitment to the God who had spoken and the covenant that was being woven into the fabric of his life. As Abram knelt before the altar, he offered a sacrifice, an act of worship acknowledging that his life, his journey, and his future were in God's hands. The air around him seemed charged with the presence of the divine, and a deep peace settled within his soul. But the journey was far from over. God's promises were vast. Abram was to become the father of a great nation, yet he and Sarai had no children. The land they trod was inhabited by others, and the path to possession would be fraught with challenges. Still, God reaffirmed his covenant. "To your offspring I will give this land," the voice promised. Abram listened, and his heart swelled with hope, even as he recognized the long road ahead. Each altar Abram built on this journey, from Shechem to Bethel to Hebron, was a milestone, a testament to growing faith amid uncertainty. These sacred places marked the unfolding story of a man chosen by God, whose obedience and trust would set the foundation for generations to come. Abram and Lot, growing wealth and growing tensions. As Abram's faith grew stronger, so too did his household. His flocks, herds, and servants multiplied greatly, blessing the land with prosperity. The wealth Abram accumulated was considerable by any standard. Cattle, silver, gold, and countless servants accompanied him as he traveled. Lot, his nephew, also prospered alongside him, tending to his own flocks and herds. However, with increasing wealth came challenges. The land of Canaan, though vast, was not limitless, and the territory where Abram's and Lot's possessions overlapped began to strain under the pressure. Tensions arose among the herdsmen and servants over grazing rights and water access. One day, the disputes grew so severe that Abram called Lot aside for a serious conversation. "Let there be no strife between you and me, nor between your herdsmen and mine," Abram said, "for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right, then I will go to the left." Lot, given the choice, gazed upon the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley, a lush and well-watered region near the city of Sodom. Despite the moral corruption known to dwell there, Lot chose the land near Sodom, eager for the prosperity it promised. Abram, trusting in God's provision, moved his household toward the hill country of Hebron, a more rugged but peaceful region. Though Lot's choice would bring future hardship, Abram's faith remained steadfast. He believed that God's promise would endure regardless of immediate circumstances. This moment of separation was more than a division of land. It was a test of faith and character for both men. Abram's willingness to yield and trust God's blessing on the less desirable territory reflected his growing spiritual maturity and confidence in God's covenant. The divine promise confirmed God's covenant with Abram. After Lot's departure, Abram settled peacefully in the hills of Hebron, where ancient oaks shaded the land, and the air was crisp with the scent of wildflowers. It was here, beneath the endless sky, that God chose to reaffirm his covenant with Abram, deepening the promise and assuring him of his unbreakable commitment. One night, as Abram lay in his tent, a profound stillness filled the desert air. The stars shimmered with unusual brightness, and Abram's heart was heavy with the weight of God's promises and the reality of his present situation. He had no children, no heir to carry on the great nation God had foretold. Suddenly, the voice of God came to him again, tender and resolute. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great." Abram listened intently as God spoke of the future. "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." Though Abram was old and Sarai was barren, the promise remained unshaken. God then led Abram through a sacred ritual, a covenant ceremony involving the passing of animals in halves and a deep, solemn darkness that enveloped Abram. This was a binding promise, a divine oath sealed between God and Abram. God declared that Abram's descendants would be strangers in a land not their own, oppressed and enslaved for 400 years, but eventually they would come out with great possessions. God promised to give Abram's offspring the land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, the land of many ancient peoples. Abram's faith was tested, but strengthened. He believed the promise, trusting that God's word would come to pass, even if the fulfillment seemed far away. That night marked a turning point. Abram was no longer just a man called out of Ur. He was the chosen patriarch, the father of nations, whose journey would shape the destiny of countless generations. The birth of Ishmael and the test of patience. As the years in Canaan unfolded, Abram and Sarai faced a deep and painful trial. Though God had promised descendants as numerous as the stars, time passed, and Sarai remained childless. The silence of this unfulfilled promise weighed heavily on both of them, casting shadows over their faith. Sarai, advanced in age and growing desperate to see God's promise realized, proposed a solution born of cultural custom. She encouraged Abram to take her maidservant, Hagar, as a surrogate to bear a child on her behalf. Though it was not the perfect plan, Abram agreed, and Hagar conceived. At first, hope blossomed with the pregnancy, but soon tension grew within the household. Hagar, now pregnant, began to look with disdain on Sarai, and Sarai's heart was pierced with jealousy and hurt. The once united household fractured under the strain of fear and misunderstanding. Sarai's anguish led her to treat Hagar harshly, driving her to flee into the wilderness. There, the angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring, comforting her with a message of hope. The angel instructed her to return and submit, promising that her son would be the father of a great nation. Hagar obeyed and returned, bearing a son whom Abram named Ishmael, meaning God hears. Though Ishmael's birth was a blessing, God reminded Abram that his covenant would be fulfilled through a son born by Sarai herself. This chapter in Abram's life was a test of patience and trust, a lesson in waiting on God's perfect timing despite human attempts to hasten the promise. Though Ishmael grew strong, Abram and Sarai continued to hope and pray for the child God had promised, knowing that the true fulfillment of the covenant lay ahead. God's promise renewed the covenant of circumcision and the renaming. Years passed, and Abram was now 99 years old, while Sarai had grown even older. Yet, the promise of a son remained unfulfilled, and doubts could have crept in. But God came to Abram once again, revealing himself with new authority and reaffirming his everlasting covenant. "Walk before me and be blameless," God said, commanding Abram to live in faithful obedience. Then God spoke with power and purpose, changing Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations. He also changed Sarai's name to Sarah, promising that she would be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. As a sign of this everlasting covenant between God and Abraham, God instituted circumcision for Abraham and all his male descendants, a mark of their special relationship and commitment. God declared, "I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you." This moment was profound. It marked a new chapter, not just in Abraham's life, but in the history of faith. The renaming symbolized a new identity rooted in God's promise. Abraham was to be the father of a multitude, a beacon of faith in a world full of uncertainty. Though Abraham and Sarah were old, God assured them that Sarah would bear a son, Isaac, through whom the covenant would continue. Abraham's heart was filled with hope and awe. This was not just a promise. It was a sacred, unbreakable bond, sealed by God himself. The promise of Isaac, divine assurance amid doubt. Despite God's profound covenant and the promise that Sarah would bear a son, many years passed, and Abraham's faith was tested anew. The weight of time and age pressed heavily upon him and Sarah. Sarah, long barren, struggled to believe that she could bear a child in her old age. Yet the promise from God remained steadfast. One day, 3 visitors came to Abraham's tent near the great oaks of Mamre. These strangers, radiant and mysterious, were messengers of God, angels sent to reaffirm the promise of a son. Abraham welcomed them with gracious hospitality, offering water, bread, and a tender calf prepared with care. As they rested, one of the visitors spoke directly to Sarah, who was listening quietly nearby. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." Sarah laughed inwardly, a mixture of disbelief and joy flooding her heart. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old?" she wondered. The promise seemed impossible, yet the word of God is never broken. The visitors departed, and Sarah pondered these words deeply. Abraham, too, was encouraged, holding fast to God's covenant. This encounter was pivotal. It reinforced the certainty of God's plan, even when human understanding faltered. Isaac, whose name means he laughs, would be the miraculous fulfillment of God's promise, a testament to faith and divine power beyond natural limits. The testing of Abraham, faith's ultimate trial. As Isaac grew from infancy to childhood, Abraham's faith journey deepened with joy and challenges. One day, God presented Abraham with a test unlike any before, a test that would measure the very core of his trust and obedience. God spoke to Abraham, saying, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." The command struck Abraham's heart like a thunderclap. How could the promise be fulfilled if the son, the child of hope and miracle, was to be sacrificed? Yet, Abraham did not waver. He rose early, prepared the donkey, and set out with Isaac and 2 servants toward the place God had indicated. Along the way, Isaac, innocent and unaware, carried the wood for the offering, while Abraham bore the fire and the knife. The silence between father and son was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and steadfast faith. Upon reaching the mountain, Abraham built an altar, arranged the wood, and bound Isaac. Just as he raised the knife, an angel of the Lord called out from heaven, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He offered the ram as a burnt offering instead of his son. This profound moment sealed Abraham's faith as unshakable and complete. God's promise was confirmed, not only by the covenant of many descendants, but by Abraham's willingness to surrender all. The mountain of Moriah became a symbol of trust and divine provision, a foundation for generations of faith to come. After the test, Abraham's worship and God's blessing. After the harrowing event on Mount Moriah, Abraham's heart was filled with awe at God's mercy and the depth of his provision. That place, where God had stopped Abraham's hand, became a sacred site of worship and remembrance. Abraham named the location, "The Lord will provide," a lasting testimony that God's care transcended human understanding. In the days that followed, God renewed his covenant blessings upon Abraham with great assurance. He promised that because of Abraham's obedience, his descendants would become as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Kings and nations would arise from his lineage, and through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Abraham's faith became the cornerstone of his legacy, inspiring his family and future generations to trust in God's promises, no matter how impossible they seemed. His life was a living testament to the power of faith, obedience, and divine grace. With a renewed spirit, Abraham returned to his homeland, where Sarah's son Isaac was growing strong. Abraham's later years were marked by peace and the fulfillment of God's promises. But his story, the call, the journey, the covenant, would echo through history as the foundation of faith for countless people. The legacy of Abraham, a journey of faith through generations. As the years unfolded, Abraham's journey became more than the story of a single man. It became the foundation for a people and a faith destined to shape the course of history. Isaac, the child of promise, grew under Abraham's watchful eye, embodying the hope and fulfillment of God's covenant. Abraham's household prospered, but his heart always remained fixed on the God who called him out of Ur. Before his death, Abraham ensured that his family's legacy was secured. He sent his trusted servant to find a wife for Isaac, choosing Rebekah, a woman of faith and kindness, to continue the lineage of promise. This act showed Abraham's unwavering commitment to God's plan, trusting that the covenant would endure beyond his lifetime. Abraham's faith, tested through trials and victories, became a beacon for future generations. His story is one of obedience, trust, and the courage to step into the unknown. It is the story of a man who dared to listen to God's voice and walk forward, even when the path was uncertain. The call of Abraham echoes still, a call to faith, to courage, and to the hope that through trust in God, all things are possible. From this ancient journey sprung forth a nation and a legacy that continues to inspire millions around the world today.